Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Misty, it's great to have you here. So to start with, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Well, hi, good morning. Thanks so much for having me, Alan. It's so great to be here. I help leaders and teams maximize their growth potential. That's what I do. So I do that through empowerment and engagement, helping teams and leaders to communicate effectively with one another. And you talk a lot about values and vision, and apparently my landscaper talks about how to mow the grass, and that's what you're hearing a little bit of right now in the background. I couldn't have planned this better, for a little bit of added humor to the situation. Right. So,
I can't hear it at all.
oh, you can't hear it. Even better, which is even funnier because I
Yeah.
can hear it loudly. Yeah, just having an opportunity to work with teams all around the world to increase engagement and empowerment across their generations.
Great.
Which
And
leads to it. Go ahead.
how did you end up there doing that?
Ooh, good question. Anger. Yeah, I was, Alan, I was 20 years ago now. I've been doing this work for about 20 years. And I was extremely frustrated, angry that I couldn't understand. I couldn't be understood by people who were, more seasoned than me. And we just didn't understand each other. So I'll give you the quick story behind it. I was working my first real job out of college. I was with the National Institutes of Health for 1 year, and then as a fellow. And then after that, I started with a government contractor. And my first opportunity with them was to interview cancer patients and then write their stories. I loved that work. Showed up early, stayed late, loved the work. And after about 4 months, the contract was done, and all they had left was meeting planning. And I am not a meeting planner. Somehow I graduated college without much around budgeting, without much around detail. There's a lot of things I did not know. It's a miracle I graduated, but there's a lot of things I did know very well too. Anyway, I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I went into the research, and I went, to learn more about the company. And I read every document they put out into the media in the 25 years they've been in business. I was thinking, maybe if I knew more, they could use me differently. I didn't know how to express, like, maybe I could do business development. Like, I just didn't know. I'm, just graduated college. What is there to do in the world? I don't know. Right. And so I presented to the CEO of the company to show her everything I knew. And at the end of that presentation, she looks at me and says, Misty, what did your parents do to deal with you? It's clear you have problems with anxiety. Do you take medication for that? Yeah. Yeah, she really did say those words. I don't think she meant anything bad by it. But for me, I knew I couldn't thrive in that environment. And so I quit my job the next day, turned in my letter of resignation. And then I proceeded to have a bit of anxiety because I had $37 to my name and $1,000 rent payment coming due, and no connections in DC. And I was brand new to DC. So it was very eye-opening for me. And I just dove into research. I started studying generational differences. I started studying, I did 150 informational interviews in cold calls, yellow pages, opened it up, that job, that company looks interesting, try to find a job. And I did 150 informational interviews. And during those interviews, sometimes, often toward the end, especially, I would get the question, I don't get these young professionals that come into my office first day on the job, first meeting with me without a pen and paper. And so I'm now all of a sudden the interviewing is reversed, and I'm now coaching and didn't intend to. And so because I didn't understand, coming out of that experience with the CEO, I didn't understand what the heck was she thinking. I would ask, well, what does that even mean? Well, they don't care about me. They don't want to be successful with this organization, and they don't respect this organization. I said, what if it just meant they didn't know they were supposed to bring a pen and paper?
Yeah.
During the first meeting, and I would hear some form of they should. And I didn't know anything about retention or engagement issues at the time. And turns out they were struggling with that with the young professionals. And so I said, why don't you just try this? And I didn't know it's called coaching, right? And so I just told them some things they could try that would make me feel empowered and engaged. And so it turns out, like 6 months later, I'm still getting calls from the same leader saying, that worked. Now what should I try? their retention started to go up, people started to get engaged, and that ultimately became the beginning of my work 20 years ago. Since then, I've written 4 books and working on the 5th one now, and expanded my work into, what can leaders and companies do to create an environment where people of all different generations can thrive, where they can bring their very best, which you and I know comes back down to the core of, do they feel safe? Do they feel safe to bring their full self? And is there clear vision? Is there clear, all the stuff that you sing so beautifully about? Are those things clear? Or is there a lot of confusion, which then leads to, people not wanting to share information and resources? Generational conflict is just a symptom of a greater problem. And today, when I'm asked, hey, can you come speak on generational differences? Alan, I honestly tell them, no, I'll come speak on generational amnesia. Because we just simply forget what it was like for us when we first came into the workforce. And we often don't remember that there were things we didn't know. And there were things that we did and tried to do to get it, to feel a sense of value to an organization as quickly as possible. And for some of us, that's how can we get a higher title faster, or how can we get the opportunities that we want to do faster? We all have been there. We just forget what that was like. And so if we can tap back into that, then we know better what questions to ask and how to guide rather than manipulate.
Yeah,
people.
And I love your story because it's so practical and rooted in common sense, right? Like you said at the beginning, you didn't know stuff, and there are just so many people out there. This is a bit cynical, I'm afraid, but there's so many people out there that have read a couple of management leadership books and then call themselves a coach, but they've no lived experience and little common sense sometimes. And it reminds me of a colleague of mine who used to say, all of this money and effort that is plowed into employee engagement wouldn't be needed if we didn't disengage people in the first place. And it's like so simple, but so true.
It is, but it'll always be a problem because we always think that people should know the things that they don't know. And I just heard, back when I was just starting out this career, you would hear a lot of things like, these people are lazy, young professionals are lazy, they don't want to pay their dues, they don't, all that stuff. And the other day I was at a networking event and I heard a new one, because it just repeats itself, these generational conflicts. They just come out in different language, right? So I just heard, they want to feel safe. And then a woman, probably close in her 60s, actually did this. You ready? I want you to remember that she was in her 60s, okay? Oh, you little poor babies, you want to feel safe? Like, I was like mortified. Like, are you kidding me? And then she said the key words, which were, I didn't feel safe in my work. And those are the key words, right? So it's hard to give to another person. I have a blog post coming out on this if you're interested in it. It's hard to give to other people what we haven't experienced ourselves. So if we didn't have these things, it's very natural for us to not know that it's a good time to give that to other people. We're just not awake enough and aware enough to know that really what we're giving is to them is giving to us, It's that simple, but I'm singing to the choir over here.
I love the phrase, we don't know what we don't know, because it's responsible for so much. So let's choose a ValuesJam card then. So I've got the deck here. I'm going to tip the card.
I'm ready.
And so to start with, how many piles would you like me to make in front of me?
1.
Okay. And I'm going to cut the deck in that case once. Would you like the top or the bottom half?
Top.
And now give me a number between, probably
3.
1 and 3. Very decisive. Now, this is the first time that this has happened to me on a ValuesJam. So let me explain what this means. You've drawn the Joker card.
Hilarious.
Which means that you can choose any values word you like for us to explore. So what's it going to be?
Are you going to give me a list?
No. I can.
Any value.
Yeah. So you choose
Generosity.
a values word. So maybe one that's really important to you, or one
Generosity.
Generosity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Hands down.
Okay. So the first question is this: what does generosity mean? And the second part of the question is, what does it look like, sound like, feel like?
What does generosity mean? Oof, defining generosity. It's an act of giving from our heart.
Right.
That's what generosity means, an act of giving from our heart. Yeah, that's all I've got for a definition. That's what's right there for me.
Okay. So from the heart, I think, is really important, because generosity to me is something that comes from within. It's not because you're obliged to or you should do or anything like that. So I'm with you there. Just today, funnily enough, just today, I sent somebody a message on LinkedIn because they said they sent a message to somebody else saying it's one act of kindness at a time, right? And I read it and I felt a little bit uncomfortable. And you've used the word act here as well. And the reason I feel a bit uncomfortable with act is that I associate it with putting on a show, acting. And in that case, it's not real and authentic. So I asked this person, why am I feeling like this? And is there a possibility to consider deed or another word rather than act? What do you think about all of that stuff? So let me ask you the same question. I mean, that word act, does it mean anything to you, or is it just you're happy with it?
I'm happy with it. I'm
Okay.
happy with it. For me, act is doesn't mean action.
Okay.
Act could mean inaction. It could be just listening to somebody. But it's a move toward a gift from the heart, which to me represents what I call my inner wisdom, or I guess some people, it's not a religious way of looking at it, but my inner wisdom, my higher power, God moving through me is enthusiasm, that word enthusiasm comes from the Greek word theos, which means God moving through, right? So enthusiasm is God moving through. And I'm not a religious person, but I'm a deeply spiritual one. So for me, generosity is allowing for that gift that is within us to come through us. And sometimes it's the opposite action, right? So sometimes it's the receiving is the generous thing to do, especially in our society where you hear constantly, you give. Well, if everybody's the giver, then who's going to be the receiver, the grateful receiver? So generosity is a two-sided thing. It's a dance with the divine on the end of the day.
Yeah, and the other thing, listening to you there, made me think that generosity is not always to do with a material gift.
No.
It can be a spiritual or emotional gift at the same time, or instead of. So, you can be generous of spirit, you can be generous with your time, you can be generous with your listening. So already this conversation's taking me to places around generosity that I must admit I wouldn't normally have thought about, because for me, when I start to think about generosity, it's a gift, it's a physical gift, one person to another. But what we've already opened up is that it's so much more than that. What about the metaphor element of the question then? So when you think of the word generosity, what image comes to mind? What sound comes to mind? And what feelings come to mind?
Well, the image that comes to mind is the various images of a snowflake. It's just so many different, and it's making me think of, there's a Dr. Emoto did some studies on words and the impact on cells in the body. And so he stuck underneath a little tiny microscope. Actually, I don't know how tiny the microscope was, but he put these little tiny things under a giant microscope maybe. And he looked to see when he spoke into the cell, like hateful, ugly words, what did it do? And it just dispersed. It went everywhere. it looked chaotic. Okay. And then when he spoke generous, kind, loving words, what happened? And the cells turned into the most, actually it wasn't cells, excuse me, it was water. He spoke into water, and this is what happened. And so when he spoke into water, the images, which I can show you some images of it, it turns out there's a boatload of beautiful, almost snowflake looking images that come. So that is the image that comes to my mind, is when our actions, be them words, non-actions, be it things, are speaking with or without words, kindness, the impact of that is just so beautiful. And I think it's far more about our intention behind our gifts than even necessarily the gift itself. Yeah. What's the energy that we have behind it? Like if somebody drops something at my front door because they feel guilty that something, it's going to have a very different impact on me than if somebody drops something at my front door because they were thinking about me and they love me.
Yeah.
The impact it matters. The intentions create the impact, and that is what matters. That's what generosity is for me.
And what about a sound or sounds, and what about feelings as far as generosity is concerned?
So I keep thinking of a good friend of mine whose name is Kristen Hoffman, and she wrote a song for Dr. Emoto called Love and Gratitude, and it is the most beautiful song I think I've ever heard. I can send you a link to it, but that's all I can think of right now when you're asking me that question is okay. Kristen Kaufman's.
And feelings?
Feelings, warmth. Feelings would be love, right? I feel love. I feel connected. I feel, if connection is a feeling, I definitely have that feeling. Generosity as a feeling is, sometimes it's sadness, to be honest with you. Sometimes when somebody is generous, when I've gone through periods of time where that wasn't there and then it is there, it'll bring tears to my eyes in the absence of it. And now it's here. And now in the presence of it, the joy, it's both of those two things. Feelings, excitement. Sometimes I feel very excited when somebody's generous. My wife picks on me because it's true. I love it when people just randomly, I had this experience for the first time in my life, it brought tremendous joy. So there's another word for it. I was out to dinner with my wife for our 19th anniversary together, and we went to a fancy restaurant, very pricey restaurant. That's not something we normally do, but during the dinner, a friend of ours from the community came over to say hello and asked us, what we were doing, and we were celebrating. Well, he paid our entire tab without telling us. Okay, that was exquisite for me. It's just so generous. And can he afford it? Of course he can. But it was also it just felt loving. I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt valued, I felt joyous. And I wanted to go back and have another meal at the restaurant just because now we can still do that. I haven't yet, mind you.
So did you give him a call and tell him you wanted to go back next week, and was he okay with that?
This is a great idea. No.
So for me, so confession, really, the image that comes to mind is just a box with a ribbon around it. There you go. The sound, actually, for me, is feedback. And the reason for this is that I just remember being in some form of training course ages ago, and somebody saying, you really need to treat every bit of feedback that you receive as a gift. Because think about it, especially when the feedback is critical or constructive rather than complimentary, the person that's giving the feedback is putting themselves at risk, because you might get really upset and disappointed and not want to listen to them and all that sort of stuff. So just take it for the gift that it is from that person. So the sound is words of feedback. And then feelings around generosity. I'm going to piggyback on what you were saying about, well, you talked about tears and you talked about sadness. I'm going to talk about tears, but not in a sad context, because sometimes when people are generous, I find it feels like my heart's getting really big and I can feel tears coming, but they're not sad tears at all. It's just you're feeling really a strong sense of connection and emotion is just bubbling through. So that's the feeling that I get. And then one other thing, you talked about how important intention was, and I think this is hitting on something really, really important, because exactly like you said, somebody can give people gifts forever and a day, but they mean nothing. And it's the gift that has been really carefully thought through for the other person. And then maybe they've gone to some trouble in order for it to happen and all of that sort of stuff. So it's the intention and the commitment to the generosity that I think is also a measure of how real and authentic, to use words we were using earlier. And then I want to ask you a question about relativity, actually, because when you were talking about the guy that could afford it, it occurred to me that for him that's easy to do, maybe, and for somebody on the next table there's just no way they could have considered that, even if they'd wanted to do it for you. So just explore a bit this concept of relativity and generosity.
So I think what you're asking is, we are generous to the degree that we can be generous. A little bit, my brain's not picking up on what you're putting down here.
All right. So if you've got $100, it's more difficult for you to give up 50 than if you've got $1 million. So it could be the same gift from two different people, but because of the relative difference, one is more meaningful to the giver than the other. So
well,
that's
what's coming for me, to be honest with you. I mean, I just don't want to say it, but what's coming for me is I've had very little money in my life, and I have a lot more than I had as a child, for sure, like lots more, right? But I have had just a little tiny bit, barely enough to get by, $37 to my name and $1,000 rent payment coming due. And I've had plenty of money. And it doesn't matter how much money I have, I still get anxious about spending, right? It still is challenging for me to make big gifts financially. It's still challenging for me. It's easier for me to go and raise money for an organization than it is for me to give my own money, right? What is that? I don't know. I don't know what that is. So maybe it's not so much about how much we have. Maybe it's about trusting that what we have is enough. Trusting that that there is plenty more to come. And this is my work right now as we speak, which is why it's vulnerable, which is why I didn't want to share any of that in this context. It's not easy for me to just throw money at somebody. I have no problem buying people a meal, like that's nice for me. But sometimes I want to buy something that's a little bit nicer for people, and I struggle. And so I have to have a conversation with myself that there really is enough and I have enough. This is not your question at all about relativity and generosity, but that's what's here.
No, I think it might be, because what you're talking about is that it's not as simple as maybe I was asking. So, you might have that base where you can afford to do it, but there's something else there as well that's holding you back. And yeah, I can relate to what you've said, because just the other day somebody came to the door and they're fundraising for a hospital in London. I live in London in the UK. And it just so happens that my youngest daughter had to go there when she was a teenager to have the base of the back of her skull removed because there was pressure on her spinal cord. So pretty serious, yeah, pretty serious stuff. And this young lady said, have you heard of the hospital? So I said, yeah, my daughter went there when she was a teenager and told her the thing. And she said, oh, great. And I could see in her eyes, she was thinking, I've got this guy. And then she said, so, we're just raising money. Do you want to sign up? And I said, no, I don't, thank you, because I'm really clear about where I give to and I'm comfortable with it. So, I love your organization, but no, I won't be. So I sometimes feel really bad about not giving to everybody, but I've kind of conditioned myself to have confidence in the decisions that I've already made and not to worry about that anymore. I think there might be a parallel, because also I guess it's because of my background was not privileged, and so I hate waste and spending money frivolously, but I do love going out for expensive meals in posh restaurants. Okay, so let's look at the other side of the coin then, because we've been talking about generosity. Where have you noticed a lack of generosity?
Ugh. Yeah. I'm looking. Within my own life, where have I noticed a lack of generosity? Like, it's interesting because right now in my life, I'm intentionally being generous with my time.
Okay.
And so there's several nonprofit organizations I'm helping right now.
Okay.
I've also been very generous in my listening with people who need that. But a lack of generosity might be around really the giving to myself, the things that I really want. So, and this goes as simple as I've been having pain in my arms for a couple of years now. And I don't want to go to another doctor. I've been to so many of them. And so I don't know if that's a generosity thing. I'm looking for what's there right now. Definitely trainings also another the time commitment. Yeah, I guess really spending money on advancing my skills has been something I've struggled with. Like, I'll do a lot of things that are free. But this year was the first year I invested in a program, and I learned a boatload, and it was very helpful to me, the empowerment dynamic. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but they started a coaching program, and I found that to be extremely valuable. Going to conferences, I just spending money on professional development. It's where I could use some improvement in my generosity for myself.
Okay. What came to mind for me is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So what you've homed in on is something very personal, and I'm kind of going at the opposite end. And by that, I mean, this is something that I see in society, which is people's lack of generosity in other people's opinions. So, we seem to have a tendency to want to just transmit what we believe in, rather than being generous to allow other people to have their say and just give them the space and room for them to share what they think and to consider it as well, actually, rather than just allow them to say it, to be generous enough to really take seriously what they're saying rather than dismiss it because it might be a different opinion to your own. So I think mine is a lack of generosity in difference. Yeah.
Something else came for me as you were talking. Really, what gets to the core for me around generosity right now, far beyond professional development, is being generous with myself in the area of assumptions. So yesterday there was a mix-up. I brought up people paying for lunch or me paying for lunch. There was a mix-up in a bill, lunch bill, that was confusing for me. I'm just not a math person. And I got really confused, and I was like, look, just tell me, how much do you want me to put on my card? No problem, because I don't want to think about it. And in the end, last night, I was thinking about it, and I went, oh my gosh, they paid for a lot of my lunch. And I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed. all of the I'm a bad person language started to come up. So it was I was lacking massively in generosity toward myself. And to help myself last night, I happened in that situation. But if they hadn't replied back pretty quick, some good humor about it, and completely understanding, and they weren't even thinking about it anymore. Of course I was. I don't know if I would have been able to let it go. So see, there's this lack of generosity toward myself in knowing what my intentions are. So self-kindness, self-generosity. I'm very quick to go, they're probably just having a rough day, or maybe they weren't thinking right with others, but I would do well to do that with myself.
Yeah.
And I'm working on it.
Okay. And you talking about the restaurant situation, and maybe it's because you mentioned the restaurant before and now we're talking about the restaurant now, that I get really quite anxious in restaurants in different settings or cultures about whether the people that are serving the food are going to think that you've been generous or not.
Oh, amen.
Yeah. So, I remember being grilled in New York by somebody saying, was it no good? What was wrong? Because it wasn't a big enough tip that had been left. And that was a really horrible experience. And then I've been to Cyprus recently, and I was conscious of, when you get a coffee or a beer or whatever it is, to make sure to add 10% or whatever it is, and then round it up a little bit. And people were delighted. They weren't expecting it. And that difference I find really quite confusing.
Oh, you just used an important word there, expectations. Yeah. And we can't control other people's expectations. That's another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And then just one final story on that, and that this kind of plays to your story about your anniversary with your wife. I heard this story from a guy, I think in Dallas, and what he said was that he is really particular about service, and he's kind of on a mission to encourage good service and discourage bad service. And he told two stories. So he said he went to one restaurant, and the hostess was chatting with her friend at the place where you're supposed to stand to be seated. So he approached and stood there for no more than a few seconds. They just didn't break the conversation at all, right? So he went up to them and he said, excuse me, I'm going to go outside again, and I'm going to come in, and I'd like you to greet me, and then we'll be fine. Is that okay? And they were like, oh, yeah, okay. And so he was telling us this story, and some people were thinking, goodness me, he's being a bit hard. I'm not sure I'd like to be out with him. But then he said, but on the other side of the coin, when service is really good, I give the same amount for the tip as I do for the meal.
Wow.
So he's like committed on both sides, which I just thought was really cool. And this happens in ValuesJam quite a lot, that I haven't thought of that when did that happen? That was probably about 10 years ago. I don't think it's crossed my mind in between times. And yet our conversations kind of just thrown it up to the surface now. So on ValuesJam, there's also a chance for you to ask your own question around generosity. So I'm going to invite you to do that now. So ask your own question about generosity, beginning with who, what, why, when, or how.
So another G word that goes with generosity is gratitude. So my question is, when and where do you feel the greatest sense of gratitude?
Okay.
In the generosity that you receive?
Okay. So I feel that most often when I wake up in the morning, and it's just the beginning of a new day. with people that I want to be with, in an environment that I enjoy, doing work that I love. And I'm really grateful for that. What about you?
I feel the most grateful. And so this to me is a generous offering, right? You gave me a generous offering to have an opportunity to talk about things that really matter, and to provide a platform for that, right? That is a generous offering to yourself, to me, and to anybody who might be listening. So these are the experiences where I feel the most grateful.
Okay.
I love my work a lot. I love to do this work, and I love to talk about this work. I love it. And so you giving me a chance to do the things, a platform to do the things that I really love to do. So thank you.
Okay. And then what about, so is the surprise element or the unknown element anything to do with that? Does it have an impact on your level of gratitude? Because, you know, we don't know each other.
Not at
So,
all.
and also you were brave enough to kind of say yes to the invitation when you really didn't know what we were going to be doing either. And now you're telling me that you're feeling a great sense of gratitude. So I'm just wondering whether that unknown bit, you know, if it had been from somebody that you knew and you were really clear in advance of what was going to happen, would it feel the same?
Well, it's not going to feel the same for me. I'm going to feel grateful either way, right? And it's still going to bring me great joy. But there's a specialness for me. When I first started my career, almost all of the speaking I did was extemporaneous. I didn't know that it was called that, right? But I had a PowerPoint presentation that basically outlined the 4 different generations and how they see the world and what were the things that happened that made them see the world the way they do from a very big picture perspective. But every time I got up to do the talk, I just spoke whatever stories came. I just spoke from my heart. And sometimes that worked out. Most time it worked out really well for me. So I built the business very quickly, right? And then somebody gave me the strong encouragement to get some training. And then this thing called perfectionism took over.
Right.
Okay. And then I started getting scared every time I go to get on the platform because it wasn't going to be good enough. Yeah. And then I ended up in front of thousands of people at the NASA's first ever leadership conference in Washington, D.C., having spent 6 months preparing the perfect talk with the perfect PowerPoint. I mean, you couldn't get a more perfect PowerPoint, I want you to know. And memorized this talk 45 minutes from the beginning to the end. I could go anywhere. Got up on the stage, completely forgot every word of my talk. I had a good opening and then I forgot everything. Had a good closing. It was everything in between. And I saw people, I could tell they were tweeting about me. And I just knew like they were as uncomfortable as I was. And I didn't feel safe. And I couldn't just be me, right? So I think sometimes when we prepare, overly prepare, we lose the spontaneity. And in the beginning of our conversation, we talked about this word theos, which ultimately turned into enthusiasm, right? So we're right. So enthusiasm is God moving through us. And I lost that ability for a long time. In fact, it was almost 10 years of my life where I would physically have a hard time even talking when I got up on stage, all because somebody told me I needed training because I wasn't good enough for them. Okay. So when you asked me to do this spontaneous thing, I was like, this is an even greater gift to me and for me to give to the world, because I know that if you came to me to ask me to do this with you, I just call you God in clothes, right? Yes, I will absolutely do that. I love to play. And I did do a little bit of research on you. It wasn't just automatic. I did go, okay, let me see what this dude's about. But I watched one of these jams, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. I would like to do that also. And so it was just an obvious yes. So yes, I love the spontaneity around it. Most of the time I would prefer spontaneity. And it's joyful for me because especially when I'm just trusting that whatever is supposed to come to me will come through me. And sometimes it gets caught right here because it's vulnerable. But it still came.
Yeah.
So it gives me a chance to be brave.
Yeah. Wow, thank you for that. And I'm curious, was there a defining moment where you checked yourself and got back on track?
Say more. How do you mean?
Well, you talked about how you lost 10 years of your life.
Yeah, COVID.
But what was it that got you back to being like, I need to let go of that perfectionism and I need to get back to it coming through me?
So first of all, I still struggle with it. I am a recovering, not recovered perfectionist. Right now I'm recovering. But to be perfectly honest with you, the thing that changed the game for me is when COVID hit and my audience, I could not see them, right? So I knew that there was perfectionism in my way, but I didn't know how to get it out of my way. And then when COVID hit, because I was still getting up on stages and still talking, I was just not having the impact that I normally would have. My enthusiasm wasn't there. I was trying too hard. And I would say my audience felt sorry for me more than they felt empowered by my words. Maybe it was a little bit of both, but I wouldn't say felt sorry for me, but felt for me. Okay. Not felt sorry for me, but could tell I was struggling. And they can feel that too. So I would say they felt grateful for the content, but also concerned for me. And then COVID hit and everything went online. And I didn't have like this whole setup where I had all these computers. Some people do. So I could only just see my PowerPoint and myself. And that was it. That was all I could see, a little tiny version of me. And so all I could do is just be me and do me.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't have any interaction at all. So I interacted with myself and my natural personality came out again. And all these opportunities started to come again because people are attracted to the light. They want to be a part of that. But when that light is dampened by fear, and fear really shows up as perfectionism a lot for me, then it's hard for people to feel like they want to be around that. So opportunities have come a lot more because I'm not sitting there going, what does he think about me? Or what, even with your audience, I don't know who's going to watch this. Most of the things that I do, I have no idea who's going to watch this. I just get to see, sometimes like people send me notes about my books and how it made a difference for them. Every now and again, I get those messages. Or I don't know if you've seen this on LinkedIn and on social media in general. I create an intention for the day, right? And my intentions are typically pretty vulnerable. They're pretty core, an experience that I'm having in the moment. I'm creating an intention to rise above something, typically in my intentions, okay? And I'm praying in my intention. I saw today I am blah. You want to hear the one I did for today?
Yes, please.
So let's see, today I show up fully to each experience with resolute confidence in my decision-making ability. Why is that? Because yesterday I was struggling with that. And so today it's happening. And I also was this morning struggling with that. And then I say today, inner wisdom, may love and faith be my guiding forces.
Well, and you've reminded me, this is why we're connected on LinkedIn, because I saw your posts, and my 31 practices is an approach which basically translates your values into concrete, observable behaviors, and then you consciously practice each day. So that was the connection that I picked up. And so sharing my practice for today is in honor of my value of enjoyment, and my definition of enjoyment is to remember how privileged I am to be doing whatever it is I'm doing. And my practice today is to share humor freely, sometimes when inappropriate, because I've got a bit of a dark sense of humor, and I love to hear people laughing and see them smiling. So I feel I need to honor that in a way on this conversation now. And you talked about PowerPoint, and it reminded me of a guy talking about PowerPoint. He wasn't very complimentary. He said, I'm not sure why it's called PowerPoint, because it has no power and it has no point. So,
oh, he misunderstands. He misunderstands.
So let's bring this Values Jam to a close. And we always do this in the same way. And the question is, what are you encouraged to do differently about generosity as a result of this conversation?
Shine a light on myself.
And can I just push you, how are you going to do that in a practical way as like a first baby step? When are you going to have chance to do what?
So you never know when the chance is going to come, because in my case, I don't know when that inner voice is going to start chastising me. But my practice, which I do practice in general, is when it starts, I typically, but last night I didn't. So I typically I visualize a stop sign, right? That's typically what I do. And then I usually turn toward my wife and ask her, what do you think about this? Which is a bad thing to do it at night, right? Because whatever she says, it's not going to be what I need to hear. You know, it's never that, you know, I'm going to turn whatever she says into further chastising. It doesn't even matter what she says, right? If I give her a script, maybe it would help, but probably not, right? Because I'm down to the races. But let me just think. Well, I think that I can reach for this conversation inside my head and find some humor. I think I can be aware of, I think the awareness of the chastising is a step. I think it's the most important step. So if I can have awareness of it, then perhaps I can not feed it, or feed it with some humor around it. But not feed it with what I tend to do, which is just learned behavior, which is obsess about it. And maybe I can remember this moment with you. That's how I can start. You're asking for one baby step. I can remember this moment with you.
Okay. And it's like, you just reminded me of when that voice starts, it's kind of saying, hey, it's you again, you know,
Right.
rather than getting obsessed and upset with it. Okay, that's a good one. This conversation has encouraged me to do two things that are very practical, actually. One, I haven't seen the Emoto experiment for a long time, and I remember thinking how beautiful the shapes that the water made were. So I'm going to be generous to myself, and I'm going to look it up, and I'm just going to watch it again. And then the second one is the 31 Practices book. In it, there are photographs by a guy called Mathieu Ricard, who is a Buddhist monk, and he also has a foundation that helps civilizations in India and Nepal and somewhere else. Because he allowed us to use his photographs, I give a percentage of the profit that I make from 31 Practices projects to his foundation. So what I'm going to do this week is work out how much this year's will be and make that donation as a result of what we've talked about. There we go.
Love and Gratitude for Dr. Emoto by Kristen Hoffman. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
and
hopefully did that come through for you?
Yeah, it did. I'll look that up. So you're now a qualified values jammer. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you so much for diving in.
Yeah, ditto. I appreciate you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.